Brett, does this look okay? Okay, good. So a little bit of while Douglas is coming down, there he is. A couple of things about how this morning, the rest of the morning, the afternoon is going to go. You know, this the sermon lesson was wonderful job. Some great insights on reaching out and helping those that are suffering, keeping the eyes of Jesus on this. As we come into the Bible class hour, one of the things that we discussed about doing was spending this particular time discussing a little more of how do we help us within the church. You could almost use the term, how can we bring about kind of a pastoral care to the flock of God's people. So that's where our focus is going to be a lot this morning, is how do we help one another when mental illness becomes a factor in our lives and we're having to figure out how to process it, what do we do with it, how do we help reach one another. Later this afternoon at 4 o'clock, we're going to be back here in the auditorium and we'll have another session that's going to be more outreach oriented. How can we as the church take this topic, and that is clearly a major, major part of our culture now, and how do we help reach other people in a way that brings them to the Lord and brings the love and that abundant life of Christ. So I'm excited about that. And Douglas, we're going to turn this over to you and not take up any more of your time. Come preach the word. Teach the word to us.
11:15. All right, I'll keep my watch here, and thank you all so much for not being scared away after my sermon. I'm glad you're still here. So my presentation will be somewhat interactive, so if you have your phone, and I love that you guys already have kind of the ability to do the QR code. This is a unique one for this presentation. So this is also my attempt to move everybody closer, so if you can't. But you can go to that website as well, menti.com, and use that code. And what that will do, it will allow for you to interact real time with some of the questions that I have. Now, you can still say it out loud, that's still allowed. But if you want to respond in an anonymous way through the presentation, that would be great. I can see that several of you guys have already been able to do that. And I love all the love that you guys are giving me. I was doing this presentation with a group of police officers in Nashville, so I'm very involved with the Metro Nashville Police Department. Similar to, I believe, Denver, there is a program in Nashville that mental health professionals will respond to calls with police officers. So I'm actually part of one of the trainers for police officers in Nashville. And I did this presentation, and there were probably around 40 police officers there, and all of them showing me love. Was an experience that I usually don't have with police officers. When they stop me when I'm barely going a little faster than the speed limit. I don't experience them as kind of showing me love or thinking about heart. So we'll be engaged through that. And to kind of get us going, I'd love to get your opinion. What would you prefer? 50 minutes at the dentist's office or 50 minutes at the counselor's office? Which would be your preference? So let's see. It looks like the counselor is winning over the dentist. Okay. All right. This is good. This kind of gives me a good sense of, how hard of a talk I'll have today. Seems like most of you, like me, would prefer staying with a counselor than a dentist. Now, another cute game would be for us to discover which one of these statements is the truth. Now, there are 3 statements here before you vote. More than 30% of Coloradans, which I had to do research to find out, somebody from Colorado, what are they themselves? Is it Coloradans? Coloradians? I didn't know. I landed on Coloradans, but again, I might be totally wrong, and you guys might think differently. 30% of Coloradans reported symptoms of depression and anxiety in the last year. Is that true? In 2020, there were more than 1,000 opiate overdose deaths in Colorado. Number 3, suicide rates in Colorado are higher than the U.S. average. Well, the lie here is the middle one, but just a little. There were about 989 opiate-related overdoses overdose deaths in Colorado in 2020 for the whole state.
The middle one you said is the lie,
Yep. So more than 30% of Coloradans report symptoms of depression and anxiety last year. That's true. Suicide rates in Colorado are higher than the U.S. average. That is true. And the middle one is only untrue by about 13. Now, I think this one, the pictures didn't show. Wow. So who is at greater risk, when we think about this? Older white males are at greater risk for suicide than the general population. Men who have experienced trauma are at higher risk of experiencing mental health difficulties than the general population. Men experiencing employment problems and issues are at a higher risk. Men who have had a marital breakdown are at higher risks at having difficulties with mental health. Men with legal and financial concerns are at greater risk of experiencing mental health difficulties. Men who misuse alcohol or drugs are at greater risk. And then the last one, men with a family history of mental health issues are at greater risk, primarily because there's a significant amount of mental health-related illnesses that are heritable, meaning passed from parents to children. Now, this is important for us to know in the community, but I would actually argue that this is critical in our community. Now, I'd love to hear, and let me see, your feedback, not on the screen, but what do you all think about these risks? Does it make sense?
I think it totally makes sense.
Yeah? Yeah, usually when I'm teaching, we talk a lot about older white males being at greater risk. Now, there are many cultural factors that may play a role in here, but often, especially for suicide, but often one of the aspects that come up are changes in employment, but also the passing of a spouse can put us at greater risk. Grief is real. And as a community, we may notice one another, we may know what is happening with one another, and to be able to step in with a greater amount of compassion and connection, especially when we notice some of these risk factors. Now, for some reason, some of the pictures that I have are not showing, but let me see. What I wanted to show on this, I don't know what's happening, is that, you guys can see it on Menti. For some reason, it's not one of the things that show up as a risk factor for men in particular is a little bit of hesitancy to ask for help. Now, I will say this, and I think it's important for us to highlight the fact that often the things that are unhelpful are actually helpful earlier for some reason. So think of it with me from this perspective. If a man has difficulties asking for help, that often started from a place of being a starter, being a leader in their family, seeing themselves as a provider, seeing themselves as like, no, I need to step up, I need to be of service. So it tends to be a good thing, but then it can be a problem later. So with that in mind, what are some of the reasons why men seek help at lower rates than women, in your opinion? Culture. Often women are almost socialized to talk a lot more about their emotions and feelings, yeah? Afraid to mess up, yeah? Pride. I'll say this, often for me, I'll have almost like a prideful shame. I'll be thinking of something like, I'm better than this. I should be able to do this on my own. It's like, what does it say about me if I were to ask for help? Yeah, cultural expectations might be perceived weaknesses, social norms, this idea of that we have to man up. Where else? We'll feel weak, pride, toughness. Men don't always like to ask for help. Yeah, all of these are very true. And as we think back about the risks, can you think about how hard it is to be able to tell a brother that you lost your job? Do you see how it can cause us to be extremely vulnerable? Or maybe if we are having marital problems? It can create some really difficult situations. I know that you guys can see it on the screen. Yes, go ahead.
Just a question. Why was the emphasis on white males instead of all males?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting research, and it usually has to do with lethality of method. So the lethality argument is this. So different populations, think white females, or African American males, or African American females, Latinos, they will be less likely to use a weapon, like a handgun, in order to attempt suicide. But culturally speaking, white males are more vulnerable because they have access, more culturally widely speaking, more access to a method that's more lethal. So think of another method would be to use medication. So that is not as lethal because if someone were to find someone that overdosed on a medication, you could treat that, but not with firearms. So that's the number one risk. Now, I don't know what is happening. I know that you guys can see it on the screen, but can you guys see the picture with the different bodies? Okay, so I apologize. I don't know if there is any way for me to change this. It usually works. But, so there what I wanted to highlight is this. Often for us men, we don't experience emotions in the way that women tend to experience. So think of it in this way. I was preaching here this morning, and I was anxious. But I didn't grow up with emotional language. I just know that my body feels weird. Often men, we experience emotions in our body first before we can actually call a name for it. So the picture that I was showing there is really a picture of a study that highlighted and asked people, where do they feel their emotions? Where do they feel their emotions in their body? And then on that, they will show that sometimes we'll feel anger, and we'll feel a lot of anger in our wrists. You guys relate to that? Like, you might not even think that you're angry, but you're already clenching your fist. That's the idea. Before I think that I'm feeling something, my body's doing something. There are several pictures there. I usually, have a joke around it that if you look at that, you will see that I believe it's shame. Can you guys see shame there? It looks like Spider-Man. So Spider-Man, now we know, has lots and experienced lots of shame, which makes sense in the story. Since we're, thinking, happiness, you can look at that picture, the whole body is activated. It's all bright yellow. And so this is an interesting research. And oh my goodness, I don't know what's happening. Let me see if I can do something that will. Okay, well, part of this was just me doing an activity that would allow for you to pin a part of your body that you feel emotion. So since we can't do that, I would love to ask you, when you think about anger, where do you feel anger in your body? Face? Yeah. Exactly. This doesn't happen to me because of my skin tone, but, you can kind of see, sometimes when we're getting angry, it can kind of get red. That means that your body is actually preparing you to fight. It's moving blood from your core to your extremities so that your muscles can react more quickly. That's actually what's happening. Your body is preparing you to respond to a threat. What about sadness? When you're feeling kind of low, down, where do you feel that in your emotion? And usually it's lack of energy. Think of feeling lack of energy in your body when you're feeling sad. Eyes. What else? What? Limbs. Yes. Very much a symptom of depression is that feeling of I just don't want to get out of bed. That's your limbs are actually lacking energy. Yeah. What other emotions can you kind of connect with your body? Anxiety. Where do you feel anxiety? Stomach, chest. Yeah, often we need to go on a quick trip to the bathroom when we're feeling anxious. Our whole digestive system responds to it. It's actually saying, let's clear up so that you're ready for anything that might come. Right? Your body is kind of doing all kinds of things. A very interesting one is disgust. Where do you feel in your body your disgust? Throat. Yeah, usually. Now, that can be extremely important. I was preaching at another congregation one time, and I did this quick demonstration. So I got it wasn't a bottle, it was a cup, and it was kind of a big space. So I had a fake cockroach in my hand. And I said, these folks at the University of so-and-so did this study, and they would sterilize a cockroach. Completely sterile. And they would give you an option. I'll give you this amount of money if you're willing to drink And they would put the cockroach on a glass of water if you'd be willing to drink from this cup. We know this cockroach is cleaner than the water itself. And they would ask people, would you be willing to drink? What do you think people did? No. They did the same with, and this is my junior high sons loved it when I said this. They did the same thing with chocolate. But the chocolate was shaped as poop. And people, again, would not want to eat it, even though they knew it was chocolate. So in the sermon, I put the fake cockroach in my water and drank. And you could see everybody in the church. They were just like, I didn't say it was a fake one. I just had it in my hand for effect. But disgust is a strong one. Stops our throat. All right, so here are some warning signs that men experience when we are at risk for mental health difficulties. And this is important for us to think as a church. Now, what I would like for you to do is to kind of rank. I believe you can, for some reason it's not showing for me. But these are things that you can think about, like if a brother in the church is becoming more aggressive, more angry, or more irritable, that's a warning sign that something deeper might be happening. Changes in mood or energy levels, a warning sign that we can be paying attention. Changes in appetite or sleep habits, very important. If somebody says or mentions that they're struggling with, their appetite. Difficulty focusing, feeling restless or on edge, high consumption of alcohol, inappropriate use of drugs, participating in high-risk activities. Now, I was at the national park yesterday hiking, and I was really actually jealous. I saw these guys taking their bouldering pads up the trail to go climbing, and I'd assume, it felt to me like this is high-risk activity, but also lots of fun. And then having aches, pains, and other physical symptoms without a clear cause. And I see that some of you guys are engaging with it, but the reality is, these are things that we can be paying attention to ourselves, in our own mental well-being, but also to pay attention to those in the church. Right? These are good signs for us to have. Now, where does this come from? And I want to highlight maybe some of the biological aspects of it. Okay. So here is a good understanding of how our biology interacts with our environment and mental health and mental illness. So this was a study that was made or done with mice. So this is not a direct translation to humans, but it helps us understand how the biology works. So here they have mice, and they actually are able to change them genetically in order to create vulnerability. The vulnerability would be change in the chromosome that is associated with depression or lack of energy. So you have 3 levels of mutation that they create, or 2 levels of created mutation. The first one is the yellow with 2 short alleles. And I know this is feeling like a lot of a biology class. If you're like, don't like biology, just tune me out. And then the second one would be 1 short allele and 1 long allele. And then the normal chromosome formation would be 2 long alleles. What happens is this: the person that has or the theory is that the person that has two long alleles or normal chromosome function for depression has the likelihood of developing depression at about 30%. This 30% is just environment. Does that mean that's just what life experiences? And that is no maltreatment. That's like a good environment, no stress. As stress goes up, that person that has the normal chromosome foundation does not have an increased risk of developing depression. However, the person that has the greatest vulnerability, that would be yellow. As life stressors go up, their genetic vulnerability goes up as well. Consequently, the likelihood of that person that has a genetic vulnerability developing depression, if at the same time they are experiencing severe maltreatment or severe stress, their likelihood goes from 30 to 60%. Right, so there is an interaction here that we as a church need to know. Because you might know someone in a context that, he has never experienced this kind of debilitating anxiety. He has never experienced this kind of debilitating depression. But as you think about the life stressors that they've been going through, maybe the loss of a job, the loss of a spouse, some trauma, you can think of a car accident, their likelihood, the person will experience themselves very differently. So you need to know that for yourself, but also those that are in our community, because those changes can help us understand that there might be a physiological impact of the disease. Now, when we think about faith, religion, and spirituality and how they overplay with all of this information, there are some interesting findings that are important. Okay. Here. What we find in the literature is that increased religiosity is linked with faster recovery of mental health in many studies. So, faith in the literature is seen as positive, is a protective factor. Religiosity often decreases severity of mental illness too. They've done several studies and found that faith communities have lower incidence of suicide than the general population. So there are some protective factors, but the literature also shows some risk with religiosity. The first one is the type of faith or belief that the person holds. Here we have belief in a God, in a loving God, and a sense of secure relationship with God tends to boost mental health. While an insecure sense of a relationship in God, viewing God as punishing and angry, is a risk factor for deeper depression. And again, just looking at the literature, these are some of the things that have been found. Now, what these are, or have been kind of called, are an intrinsic orientation versus an extrinsic orientation. So the individual that has an intrinsic orientation to their faith will tend to have a protective factor in their mental health. Now, what is an intrinsic religious orientation? is a belief that their religion and all of its teachings and attempts to live their lives as their religion teaches how they should live. So basically, when you're able to internalize the nature of the religious community, meaning there's a loving God, and this loving God actually motivates me from the within. You know, it makes me think of today as Pentecost and having the gift of the Holy Spirit after baptism. Right? It's intrinsic. God is within, and God is what motivates me to do and to serve and to be a Christian, while an extrinsic orientation tends to be a method of using religion to achieve non-religious goals, essentially viewing religion as a means to an end. It is used by people who go to religious gatherings and claim certain religious ideologies to establish or maintain social networks while minimally adhering to the teachings of the religion. So, as soon as we're able to make this differentiation, we can see vast different outcomes in mental health. So, if I come to church, if I experience church as something that gives me life, it boosts mental health. If I come to church as a way of gaining social life, that tends to link to poorer mental health. And I thought that was a fascinating study. Fascinating. Talked about this, right? So extrinsic faith orientation. The person tends to embrace the creeds or the beliefs lightly, and they tend to not internalize the faith. While an intrinsic faith orientation is more of an embracing of those beliefs, and they internalize and you follow it fully. Now, this is so important as a church, because this allows for us to see how important it is. And again, I did not grow up in a Christian church or in a Christian family. I actually was baptized when I was 18. And as my mentors over the years discipled me, it was so important for a new Christian for me to understand that the things that I did, the beliefs that I held, the things that I didn't do weren't done because of what people thought or what people would see, but they were done because they were giving me life. Right? So when I abstain from sin, it's not just so other people see me as holy. Right? I abstain from sin because it gives me life. So, how to help a brother? Look for changes in the person's behavior and mood. Talk to the person and ask them how they're feeling, especially among men. It can be kind of weird, but if we have a church culture of encouraging this kind of conversation, you might be like, yeah, I don't know what I'm feeling, but man, my stomach has been bad for weeks. I've been feeling like just heart palpitations a lot. Does that make sense? That allows for us as a church. Also, destigmatize talking to a doctor or a mental health professional. And this is another thing, like I'm not from here, but one of the things that I do often back in Tennessee is to help churches do their research and connect with faith followers or folks in the community that are health providers, both physical and mental health, so that we can kind of collaborate, right? To say like, oh, here's a list of folks that we have talked about that have been helpful. And I'm sure even in a group like this, there might be a group of men that already have been in counseling that know those providers and could help create that resource. Destigmatization, talking about mental health, physical health as this is part of being well is important. Create a list, like I mentioned, of trusted providers. And then if someone is at risk of suicide, do not leave them alone. And what I mean by that is this. We move toward the individual. If they are thinking about ending their lives, or even often some of the first signs, they tend to be related to, I don't feel like living anymore. Right? It's not an active thought, it's a passive thought. It's okay, let's step into it. Let's stay in community. If the person is in danger, call 911. In Tennessee, we have several resources. I'm sure Denver has the same. Now, I would like to, and it's 11:15, the time that I should stop? 11:15. So it's 11:09 now. So I would love for us to kind of have just a few minutes and talk about this. If you have any questions, comments, you can post it there, but you can also say it out loud. It gives us just 6 minutes to kind of talk. How do you think the church can be helpful to one another? How can men be helpful? Fellowship. Say that again? Fellowship, yeah. I remember being in Atlanta, and again, I'm a soccer person, but I remember all the guys at church, that's the feeling I had, played golf. That was one of the most rich fellowship activities I've ever had. Like, I don't think Vanessa liked it very much. It was a long, but yeah, it was just kind of, now they did something, I'm horrible at golf, but they would let me go with where their ball went. I just bought balls that stayed in the woods, never found. I'll just get a new one and just drop it where they were. Yeah. What else? How can we, any questions or even comments, suggestions? Not everybody at the same time. I know. It's hard.
Seek out people that need help.
Yeah. Yeah. Seeking them out. And I appreciate you saying that. And I would say this. Whenever you seek out someone to help, know that the power that we have through God is in community. Often we think that I have to do it by myself, and that can be overwhelming. But I think if we are able to do that together, that can be really, really good. Yeah?
I was also going to say, be willing to really listen. And if you're going to ask someone how you're doing, don't just be like, oh, okay, you're suffering, but I'm going to go talk to someone else now.
Yeah.
To share your vulnerability with them.
Yes. I was thinking of someone that mentioned this, that if, someone shares their feelings with me, maybe the most important thing in my response is that I lead with my weakness first. Right? That I don't lead with my strength of like, oh yeah, I'm going to help you. I'm going to do this. I'm going to, but really to be like, yeah, thank you for saying that. I don't know what to say. I don't know, but I'm here. Sometimes that's all we need to do. Yeah, thank you. That's powerful. Yeah.
You had a list earlier of basically symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, of issues.
Yeah.
Lack of sleep, irritability, depression, that kind of stuff. Seems to me in a church environment, we have to know each other well enough to be able to identify those signs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we don't spend enough time with each other beyond the surface, even though, how are you? I'm not going to be able to tell you, you look like you haven't slept well, or you look like you're being aggressive.
Yeah.
You said, hi, how are you? I'm fine, moved on. We've got to get to know each other at a deeper level where we can notice changes in behavior. We can notice changes
Yeah.
in issues and ask and,
Mm-hmm.
address those.
Mhm.
Otherwise, everything's just a circle.
Yes, and I was talking to Corey about, like often, we live in communities that we live really far apart. We don't have a lot of the weekly, day-to-day interaction with one another. So it makes kind of the time that we're together like prime real estate to be like, to create and to offer those moments. Now, I will say this, and this is a trick that I have for myself. It does not need to work for everybody. But every time that I think of a brother throughout my week, like somebody's face comes to my mind, I am extremely intentional about sending them a text. And using technology to be like, hey, thinking of you, hope your week's going well. Right? Because of that distance, sometimes we do need to use technology to be intentional and to kind of say like, yeah. And that kind of has led to so many powerful conversations, which tends to help me a lot.
Douglas, to that point,
Yeah.
clearly, text message won't take the place of a face-to-face conversation, but what's interesting to think about what you're describing, there are times you can send that little note that if somebody's really struggling, it may help them to realize, okay, I'm really not alone with somebody thinking of me, and this was just random.
Yeah.
Or, we, in churches, we would say, hey, maybe God gave a little nudge somehow to make that happen. But also what it could do is help them understand or feel like they do have somebody to talk to, so that when they finally reach the point saying, I've got to communicate with somebody, they may pick up the phone and call you, or they may grab you after church one day and say, hey, we have lunch soon. So that's the power behind it.
And I will say this, just that habit has actually caused Vanessa and I to create a line in our budget monthly for coffee and eating out with brothers. So I have like in our budget, because often it will be like, oh yeah, I'm doing well, hope you're doing well too. But sometimes like, man, this has been a hard week. And I will text back and say like, hey, I'd love to take you out to coffee. Would you be interested? And I'll just do that. And it allows for that during the week, more intentional. Now, there's other opportunities too, like Bible classes, home Bible studies. There are ways that we can move and be intentional. But especially among men, I see extremely important that weekly contact. But thank you, that's great. I think we are 1 minute over time, so I want to be sensitive of that. And I want to say thank you. This is a true honor for me to be here, and I'm anticipating that, you guys will grill me later, but it's looking like the question and answer is going to be easy tonight.
Yeah, everybody's asking their questions now. So we did grab some I grabbed some screenshots. I had my phone open, but if you have other questions that are coming to mind, this was great. You're going to have to tell me about this program later because this is fantastic. If you have other questions that you want us to maybe open up for when we have the whole group together later, again, you can text those to me. Can we, Joel or Jay, somebody, can we pull that up, the Q&A info slide? We'll give that one more time here for you in a moment. send those to me. We'll be sorting through those and at least try to have them categorically put together if we have several similar ones. But Douglas, thank you very much. This was really, really great. And I love how the idea is that we've got to be together. So start figuring out ways to do it, guys. That's the best way we can do that. But we're going to go ahead and wrap this up with a quick word of prayer, and we will be dismissed. We hope to see you back here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Father God, thank you so very much for giving us the church. Thank you for giving us other brothers and sisters with like faith who can wrap around us and that we can share life together to be able to experience your love. Father, so many times we just got to realize that we are the tools. We are the vehicles through which your love is felt in so many ways. Father, help us to be more attuned to one another in our lives. Help us to be purposeful and intentional and active in building the bonds that are going to help us be there for one another when these difficulties arise in life. Thank you again for Douglas and for Vanessa and the work that they're doing. And bless us through this afternoon with lunch and bring us back together for another session later today. We pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen. You're dismissed, guys.